What's up, family, and welcome back to the channel. Today, I would like to have an interesting conversation about how monotheism is actually paving the way for atheism. It's actually helping us out. It's been doing us an incredible solid. Obviously, I'm being a little tongue in cheek here, but I do want to provide some insight into this area and see if we can pull a really good conversation from it. I hope y'all are ready for this. If you haven't already, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that alert notification bell, and consider joining, supporting, or connecting with this channel, community, or content in any way that makes sense for you. And of course, we have some of the dopest merch on the planet, so check it out. And we have books. You can find them anywhere where books are sold online. Okay, so let's jump into this conversation. I'm kind of excited about this one. Most of you know I have some pretty interesting thoughts about monotheism as it stands, in the sense that when it comes to true monotheism, I don't think we've ever actually seen it yet. I've often said that gods are kind of like Pringles. You can't eat just one. They're like Pokemon. You got to catch them all. And so even some of the things that we call monotheism are still not monotheistic, in the sense that they still have more than one supernatural deity that are attached to them. They just have one that they consider all powerful or more powerful than the rest, which is really not a distinction from polytheism, because within polytheism, there's always typically a God who's stronger than all the rest. So like in Christian monotheism, the other gods just get relegated to lesser deities, but they are still supernatural entities, which still puts them in the classification of gods. But today, I'm going to forget all of that, and we're going to talk directly about the context of monotheism and how it actually helps the transition, if you will, to atheism. All right, so let's get some context. I feel like I've used that word a lot already. All right, so monotheism, particularly in the dominant Abrahamic religions, has played an indirect role in paving the way for atheism, by insisting that only one true God exists and dismissing all other deities as false or superstitious. Monotheistic beliefs systems set a precedent for the rejection of alternative spiritual explanations. This binary thinking simplifies the spectrum of belief, reducing everything outside of monotheism to superstition. And a very interesting thing that has happened, especially with Christianity, is that, remember how I mentioned earlier that I rarely see any true examples of monotheism among Christians because of these beliefs in other lesser deities. Because Christianity has kind of figured that out, there are many Christians who no longer believe in angels or demons, because they're trying to get as close to monotheism as possible, right? So, monotheism refers to the belief in the existence of only one God, as opposed to polytheism, which acknowledges multiple gods. Monotheism became dominant through religions like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Historically, humanity's religious beliefs began in polytheism. Or I'd even go back and say animism and totemism, but those things were also polytheistic, though the theistic nature of them had not quite been attributed yet. The magical nature there, the mythical nature was there, but not quite the theological. But these are where different gods represented various natural forces or societal needs. Over time, polytheistic systems transitioned to monotheism largely through cultural, political, and religious shifts, such as in ancient Israel with the development of Yahweh worship. By insisting that only one true God exists and dismissing all others as false, monotheism set the foundation for later secular thought by categorizing all other deities as superstition. This binary belief system simplified the religious landscape, reducing the spectrum of spiritual options, which I've talked about on one of my more popular videos about how um, monotheism is the secularization of polytheism, and then atheism is the secularization of monotheism. But then even polytheism was the secularization, if you will, of animism. These are all of these things exist on a sociological evolutionary spectrum of our development and our elevated understanding of the world. Ultimately, the more we begin to understand, in layman's terms, the less we don't understand anymore, if that makes any sense. So before, we didn't understand that the rustle behind the bushes could have been the wind, or it could have been the lion, and there's a specific way to tell, right? But now we can, you know. So now polytheism was common in early human civilizations, from the Egyptians and Greeks to the Mesopotamians and Romans, where gods were responsible for various aspects of life. However, monotheism emerged in ancient Israelite society around the 14th century BC, interestingly enough, during the Egyptian reign of Pharaoh Akhenaten, who is ultimately credited with being the kind of first leader, Akhenaten, who gives us this idea, or who starts wrestling with this idea of monotheism, in the form of Atenism. Everybody would worship the not the but the Aten. They would move from Ra to the Aten. Now, this movement ultimately failed in Egypt, but Egypt did have ownership of a little bit of Canaanitic territory, where this group of people who would become known as the Israelites were. You know, so when you're actually reading the Bible and you try to figure out, why did these Israelites feel the need to fake this story about them being in slavery for 400 years in Egypt? Why do they need to fake this story? Well, they needed to fake this story because they needed that connection to where their monotheism comes from. And please notice that in the writings of the Bible, the Israelites only become monotheistic after they come from Egypt. You only start hearing talk about the Ark of the Covenant after they come from Egypt. Oh, this is good stuff. Okay. We'll talk about this more in Bible study with an ex-pastor, where we learn the Bible and laugh at the bullshit. All right. So, but of course, Akhenaten attempted to impose monotheism with the worship of Aten. And although his efforts did fade, monotheism eventually took stronger root with Judaism and its focus on Yahweh. Now, the transition often involved political factors such as the desire for social cohesion and control, which was easier to maintain under a single centralized God. Now, this is one of those areas that I do want to do my due diligence here and highlight. This is what I mean by secularization. This is one of the things that I've been calling out ever since I kind of came out of the prayer closet and has become vocal, is that the church is not as religious as you think it is, that religious adherents are not as religious as you think they are, because religion itself is not immune from the works of secularization. And as a matter of fact, the reason why God has become more human over the years, and when I say it's really more humane, God has always been human. But the reason God has become more humane over the years is because of secularization. These religious adherents feel the need to secularize their God so that their God will still have some relevance in reality. You know, churches have increasingly secularized, religions have increasingly secularized. But even when a religion changes for the desire for social cohesion, that's not a spiritual desire, that's a natural desire, which would then be a byproduct of secularization. Anytime a religion changes, it changes because society has changed, not because that God has changed, because that God isn't real. All right. So, um, but over time as Christianity and Islam spread, monotheism became more dominant, displacing polytheistic traditions. The insistence on one true God inherently dismissed other deities as false or lesser, setting a precedent for the rejection of multiple gods, that eventually led to the modern secular critique of religion. This historical shift from polytheism to monotheism laid the groundwork for a natural progression toward atheism, which is something that I've spent a lot of time talking about. As once the belief in false gods was normalized, questioning the existence of any god became a logical extension for many people. So in ancient times, belief in many gods, which we call polytheism, was common, with different cultures having their own pantheons. Monotheism fundamentally challenged these beliefs systems by declaring one supreme god, therefore invalidating all the others. But and that language isn't quite right, and I think that's how we miss when monotheistic religions are still polytheistic, because the defining definition of monotheism is not one supreme god. That quantifier isn't necessary if there's just one god. Monotheism is technically one god, period. No need for a quantifier, no adjectives necessary, because there are no others. If there are no other gods, it don't matter if it's a black god or a white god, because there's no other gods to compare it to. Don't matter if this is a strong god or a weak god, because there's nothing to compare it to. So the moment you begin to add those quantifiers, then you know you're dealing with something that has room for belief in other gods. So the supreme is not is not a great characteristic there. But I just got to throw that stuff in there for nuance so that we kind of wrestle with these things, right? Um, but yeah, this paved the way for for religious societies to be more comfortable dismissing not just individual gods, but entire categories of divine beings. Christianity, Islam, and Judaism framed polytheistic gods as either false or demonic, leading to the widespread belief that these other gods never truly existed. You see that slippery slope you put yourself on there? All right, so once monotheists reject the idea of multiple gods as mere superstition, they've already opened the door to skepticism about supernatural entities altogether. The idea of one god can also begin to be seen as equally arbitrary when questioned under the same critical lens. So, now, superstition, in a general sense, refers to irrational beliefs in supernatural forces or practices that influence outcomes. In the context of monotheism, the term is paradoxically applied to beliefs in other gods or spiritual entities, which are labeled as false or pagan by monotheistic traditions. However, this classification becomes ironic when examined critically, as monotheistic beliefs themselves often involve faith in unseen supernatural entities and divine interventions, otherwise known as superstition. Monotheists use the label of superstition to reject non monotheistic practices like polytheism, animism, and folk traditions, while maintaining faith in their own supernatural God. This selective application of the term reflects an attempt to position their own beliefs as rational and correct while dismissing others as irrational. The contradiction lies in the fact that, under a purely skeptical or rational lens, the belief in one God is no less supernatural or arbitrary than belief in many gods or other mystical practices. This paradox opens the door for critical questioning, as individuals who are encouraged to reject other gods as superstitions may begin to apply the same logic to their own belief in a singular God. As monotheists deem non monotheistic beliefs as irrational, they inadvertently encourage a mode of thinking that can ultimately lead to questioning all forms of supernaturalism, including their own. This becomes a key step in the path towards skepticism, and for some, like myself, atheism. And actually, this literally it happened to me. I remember I was still in high school, and I was leading this mission group into the projects to pray for people in the projects, and we do Bible study and stuff like that. Um, and so it started raining while we were supposed to be doing our Bible study, and I decided, you know what? We have faith in God. Let's pray that the rain stops. And we prayed. And just to be clear, it wasn't raining hard. It was just trickling. And it stopped trickling because it was likely going to stop trickling. But we prayed and it stopped trickling. And at first, I remember thinking like, "Oh, that's cool. We prayed and it stopped raining." But then I remember how the church had framed Native American practices, such as rain dances, where the idea was they dance to make it rain. Yeah, that's still a practice, isn't it? Ba-do-ba-da-ba, psh. Or they dance to make it stop raining, right? And we'd identified that practice as superstitious, thinking that there's anything you can do to control the weather. Ha ha ha, you and your false gods, you and your superstitious beliefs. And yet here I was, doing the exact same thing. Superstition by any other name is still superstition. And so that did become a very slippery slope for me, because it's just like, oh, snap. I actually have to critically engage my practices and then realize that in the same way that I could look at those rain dances and say, no, your rain has absolutely nothing to do with the weather. And if it actually does start raining, it's not because you danced. I had to be able to say the same thing about myself, that if it actually does stop raining, it's not because I prayed. Hello. All right. So for believers who begin to doubt the monotheistic God, the consequence is stark. There are no other gods left to consider. In a polytheistic worldview, one could always reject one deity while maintaining belief in others. But in monotheism, there's no such alternative. The only other choice for many disillusioned monotheists is non-belief altogether. Once the idea of one true God is challenged, the rejection of all deities becomes a more viable, appealing option. This explains why many atheists and agnostics come from monotheistic backgrounds. When these believers deconvert, they often leave not just their specific religion, but the entire framework of belief in deities, as I have. You've heard me have to remind people over and over again, like, oh no, I don't believe in any of it. So you can keep all of your delusions to yourself. Whether you call your delusion Allah, whether you call your delusion Jehovah, whether you call your delusion, birth charts, whatever it is, I don't believe in any of it. You know, love reading stories about them, always been a fan of fiction, love to speculate. But anything beyond that is a bridge too far for me. Um, but yes, so the binary opposition of monotheism simplifies the transition to atheism, leaving fewer spiritual options for those who abandon faith. The transition from monotheism to atheism or agnosticism is often a significant intellectual and emotional journey. Many people raised in monotheistic traditions experience what could be called a binary opposition of belief, where there is one true God and everything else is false or superstitious. This absolutist framework can simplify the process of deconversion because once someone begins to doubt the existence of their one true God, there are few, if any, alternative deities or belief systems to fall back on, which is why, other than becoming atheist or agnostic, well, other than becoming atheist, quite a few in the agnostic realm still pull away from the idea of any chosen deity at all and choose instead to adopt a more natural superstition. Because many of them still do adopt superstitious ideals, such as the universe cares for me and stuff like that. And maybe it does, but to attach a belief to it is yikes. Well, I mean, that's the slippery slope, right? The thing that I learned from my deconversion is I don't have to attach a belief to anything that I can't justify. I can think about those things. I can speculate about those things, but to attach a belief to something that I can't justify, it's not just a slippery slope. Into believing the wrong things, it's a slippery slope into not knowing how to think. So I pass on stuff like that. Um, but so I want to also highlight some common denominators in the transition for people who leave monotheism, right? Um, and yeah, who leave monotheism, period. And it's typically doubt that leads to broader skepticism, as opposed to others where it's event based, like I typically like to say. So you lose somebody, right? Or you lose something, or something in work, something in life doesn't work, or church goes wrong, or somebody at church treats you those wrong. These are event based deconversions, or even emotion based deconversion, which all deconversion has some hint of emotion to it. But there's certain people who didn't have a necessarily trigger event for their deconversion, right? And so for them, without having event. It's just doubt itself. For many, the initial trigger is about specific is doubt about specific religious doctrines, the existence of heaven, hell, or divine intervention. These doubts often lead to questioning the very foundations of their faith and the logical consistency of religious teachings. For example, they may begin to question why they are told to believe in one supernatural entity while dismissing others as myth or superstition. That's kind of like saying, "Hey, don't look at the man behind the curtain." That's what it does. But there's also moral and ethical conflicts, which I think was a major one for me. Often individuals experience a moral or ethical dilemma with monotheistic teachings, such as the problem of evil or the contradiction between modern ethics and religious scripture. For example, traditional teachings on gender roles, LGBTQ plus issues, or divine punishment can lead to cognitive dissonance. This ethical clash can push someone toward rejecting not just the religious institution, but the underlying concept of a God. And this definitely played a role for me. You kind of go through this thing, whoa, snap, God is not good. Oh, snap, God is a jerk. Oh, snap, God is irrelevant. Oh, snap, God's likely not real. See how that works? Um, And then, so there's also, of course, scientific and intellectual engagements, which we've also seen be a very key factor for many people's deconversion. Exposure to science, philosophy, and secular education plays a significant role in the transition. Many atheists cite evolutionary theory, cosmology, or critical thinking tools as the frameworks that help them reassess their religious beliefs. For me, it was critical thinking tools. The scientific method promotes questioning and skepticism, leading individuals to critically evaluate religious claims against empirical evidence, often finding the latter lacking. And then, of course, the influence of secularism, which I often remind people that secularism is in order to understand secularism, you have to take the long view. You can't just look at the past 500 years and say we became secular in the past 500 years. Secularization is a movement that has been taking place ever since the moment our species kind of got some type of evolutionary consciousness about itself. Secularization is our elevated understanding of the world that we live in uh, and how to navigate it naturally. So, in a world where secularism is increasingly prominent, those who deconvert find alternative worldviews that provide meaning without reliance on the supernatural. Secular ethics, humanism, and rationalism offer frameworks for understanding existence, morality, and purpose without invoking a deity. This exposure to new non religious ways of thinking provides an alternative that makes the leap from monotheism to atheism less daunting, as it did for me. You know, I think many people have said it's just like if you're a monotheist, then you're just one God away from being an atheist. You're already an atheist to every other God, to every other spiritual experience, to every other supernatural explanation that doesn't align with your particular worldview. You're already an atheist. You know, you're just an atheist with monotheistic tendencies. You're an atheist with theistic tendencies. That's what we're gonna do. That's what we're gonna call that. All right. And then the last factor, common denominator that I want to hit is the loss of emotional or psychological need for religion. And that's where I'm at, just like completely. It was almost damn near like automatic for me, which is why I do definitely empathize with people who still have the fear of hell, because I didn't have that fear. But that was, even as a pastor, I didn't have that fear. So I'm sorry. But many who leave monotheism report that once they deconvert, they no longer feel the emotional need for a higher power. Once free from the belief in an overseeing deity, many atheists find that they can address their psychological and existential needs, like community, purpose, or comfort in the face of mortality, through secular means like community involvement, self reflection, and an acceptance of the randomness and beauty of life. And that is precisely where I am. Um, I don't have a need for a higher power. I know people like Oprah do, but I don't. I don't even know what that word means. I don't know what that phraseology means. Higher. In what context? Okay. I like to get high, but like what context? Higher than me? Like, what do those words mean? Power. What kind of power? Like, so I don't, I, those things are question marks. You can't need something that you don't even know what it is that you need, in a sense, you can, like, you can need medicine and not know the medicine you need. But in the sense of needing but you would still have a definition for the medicine. You'd have a definition for how this thing meets this need. But having a need for a higher power without having a need for that higher power to meet doesn't make much sense, especially without having a definition for what makes this power high and what makes this high powerful. I like the poetry of that. All right, so but once, so yes, and then of course, once the idea of an overseeing deity was gone from my head, it was just like, oh yeah, this life is just life. I used to have and I likely still do struggle with some of these things, but my depression used to be just insane. Um, but it was so normal for me that I didn't even realize I was depressed the majority of the time. But it was because I was convinced when life wasn't going right, that meant that this deity must be disappointed in me, or this deity must be trying to test me. And damn it, I was getting tired of being tested. But then I was also treating myself like I was frail or fragile, like anything in the world could break me. And that's what I'd say. Oh, this is too much. This is going to break me down. I don't know how I'm going to be able to take this. All the while taking it, living through it, operating through it, but giving myself these superstitious ideologies that I need to beg this sky daddy to deliver me from this just torturous life. And it turns out the torture came from believing in the sky daddy. The moment I stopped believing in the magical sky pimp, it allowed me to engage with life as it was and to remove unhealthy expectations from reality. And to realize that when life goes wrong, that shit ain't personal unless somebody is personally doing it to you. You know? That's me. And so now, like, I see beauty in life. I see randomness in life. I see the chaos and I see the complexity, and I'm not afraid of it. It's been here longer than we were. We've survived. Hell, we've done more than survived. We've thrived in the chaos, in the complexity. And that's the one thing, that's one of the biggest things that religion robs you of. It really robs you of the beautiful nuance of the human story, because it gets you caught up in foolishness like original sin or predestination or we have fallen from grace. If there's any point in human history that you would like to go back to, be my guest. As of me, I'm moving forward. You know? Oh, that reminds me of a gospel song. I'm going to rewrite that. I'm not going back. I'm moving ahead. I'm here to declare. Now I got to change those words all the way, but I'm moving forward is the point. All right. So the transition from monotheism to atheism often involves a complete rejection of the concept of gods rather than a search for another deity. The binary nature, and that's the thing, right? Because a lot of people so what do you believe in now? Well, because I was a monotheist and I stopped believing in this God, there is nothing else to believe in. You know, the transition from monotheism to atheism for me was a complete rejection of the concepts of gods, deities, supernaturalism, superstition, because all of those things by definition are irrelevant, even if they were real. The fact that you've already put them outside of nature makes them irrelevant to a natural existence. You did that shit to yourself, Christians. All right, but the binary nature of monotheism, where only one God is real and all others are false, leaves little room for spiritual alternatives. Once someone doubts the existence of the monotheistic God, the natural progression for many is to question the existence of all gods and supernatural entities. In this sense, the strict exclusivity of monotheism can inadvertently streamline the path to atheism, as it encourages an all or nothing mindset. Mm, mm, mm. For these individuals, the transition may involve moments of profound disillusionment and liberation. The relinquishing of religious frameworks can feel like a loss of certainty, but it also gives rise to a more expansive view of the world, one that is grounded in empirical evidence and human experience. This shift frequently leads to the adoption of humanism or secularism, where personal autonomy ethics, and reason take precedence over religious dogma. By rejecting the one true God, former believers often find that they no longer need any gods to fill the void. They replace faith with inquiry, superstition with reason, and theological belief with human centered approaches to meaning and purpose. Thus, monotheism, despite its claim to exclusivity, can inadvertently serve as a stepping stone to atheism, especially as believers who question their faith find themselves left with no other gods to turn to. And obviously, I'm not just talking out of my neck here. I'm one of those believers who went from monotheism to atheism with nothing in between, you know? Monotheism also encourages a worldview where individuals are told to think critically about other gods and myths. This critical thinking, when applied inwardly, can lead to questioning one's own religious beliefs. Many atheists who were once monotheists use the tools of critical analysis they learned to deconstruct not only competing religions, but their own as well, which again, I kind of highlight back that experience of praying for the rain. The same critical analysis I had used to critique rain dancing of indigenous populations, I had to use those same tools to deconstruct my own belief. Yeah. In essence, monotheism, with its claim of the one true God and the rejection of other belief systems, inadvertently creates a gateway to atheism. Once the dominant God figure is questioned, it leaves little room for other theistic options, accelerating the journey towards secularism. In simple words, one day every knee will bow and every tongue shall confess that reason is rational. You know what I'm saying? All right. So by positioning itself as the only truth, monotheism narrows the spectrum of belief options available to those who doubt. As more people deconvert from monotheistic religions, they find themselves not in search for other gods, but in a space where no gods make sense. This creates a direct, if unintended, link between monotheism and the rise of atheism in modern societies. And that really is it in a nutshell. The moment we started creating the narratives that these other gods don't make sense, and we start having all of the reasons why these other gods don't make sense, it became easier to say, well, damn, gods, period, don't make sense. And this again is why, like, I'm pushing. I have a video that I got to do. I don't know when I'm going to do it. I'm pushing for more pastors to have the safety to deconvert because they're the main ones who are going to go straight to atheism because they've spent their lives, many of them, pointing out the flaws of other religions, you know, which is going to make them excellent co-laborers in this field of work. And I want to make sure to recruit them into this work. Come to the dark side. Execute orders 66, do it. I don't know. I don't know why I gravitate towards Palpatine. I also gravitate towards Lex Luthor, but only in Smallville. If it wasn't, the other Lexes were okay, but Michael Rosenbaum's Lex Luthor was, you were right all along, Mr. Kent. I am the villain of the story. Yeah, I like that. Okay, so I'm done. This was a great conversation. Thank y'all for hanging out with me. I hope y'all enjoyed this. I hope you took something away from it. And of course, I always enjoy hanging out with y'all. So if you haven't already, like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that alert notification bell. Consider joining, connecting, or supporting this content, channel, or community in any way that makes sense to you. And check out our merch because it's dope as fuck. And also, we have books on Amazon or just wherever books are sold online. And our names are unique enough that as long as you type them in, you'll find us. Darante LaMar and Darnea Durice. All right, that's all I got. Until next time, keep rising, stay progressive, and if you can, stay beautiful. I'll holler at you later.